Hello! I know I built a horse before this, but hear me out. This was like a year ago. I really love horses and had some really good inspiration. Plus, isn't it interesting how much I can improve in a year? This build started all the way back in March when I was lucky enough to see someone riding with a garrocha. That is a wooden pole around 3.5 meters or 11.5 feet long, traditionally used to herd cows or bulls in Spain. So I made a plan. How do you go about building organics? Well, I like to plan a bit ahead and have rough measurements before I even start building. One way to go about this is to frame the body of the horse on a square or whatever animal you are building, so that you know how wide, long and high the body is. Draw another line for the belly and we can see it is about halfway. The next stage I will lovingly call the blob state, because that really is it all. Except the moment I chose to build is when the horse is going in a really small cycle and the rider is holding the garrocha so that its tip stays in the middle. From above, the horse should be banana shaped since it is walking in a cycle, and because it is cantering with a bit of speed, it should also be leaning inward ever so slightly. A bit more about the walking cycle my horse will be in. Canter is a 3-beat gait. This means a left hind leg will first touch the ground, then the other hind leg and the front leg diagonally to it, and lastly the other front leg. I won't mind to be in the beginning of the cycle though, where just the first leg is on the ground. Still, I make sure that you can anticipate what is about to happen next. I eyeballed the legs roughly, and then I went back to readjust them. Of course the horse won't have stick figure legs forever, so I thicken them out and then work a bit on the body. At this point you can kind of guess what it will be, but me knowing how it looked like in the end is somewhat surprised how it looked like that. I started with this one hoof and it took a moment to figure out how it should be shaped. Then I go around and simply rotate and paste it to all the other legs too. Of course I will redo parts of each one, but like this I at least save some time and make sure they have the same size. The right shape of a hoof is a whole topic in itself by the way, so I stuck rather closely to my references. One reason I was able to get as many details as possible is that I happen to know a horse, and whenever I was stuck I would go take a look at it. Seeing how a real horse moves gives a whole new perspective. The head was a bit tricky since I needed it to be on an angle, and when I remember correctly, to keep it somewhat easier, in the end I stuck to a 45-degree angle for almost all more complex things. My first try just doing it didn't work, so I went back to scratch and first put together some simple shapes not on an angle. Then I add and remove to those shapes until it looks like a horse head. Here you can see me trying to figure out the right amount of rotation, and it will be a lot more accurate than the first try. Still, I need to smooth it out again and adjust the shape and size a bit. Before I add any of the rider or tail or other details, I want to work a bit more on defining the muscles and structures on the legs, neck and body. At some point I tried adding a mane to it, but it somewhat destroys the line of the neck, so I decided it would just be braided. Actually the tail should be too, but I decided against it. Now this is looking like a horse, but that's not enough for me. Time to go over everything once more and add and remove blocks as it seems fitting to me. Again, here are coming in some references handy, and let's not forget I literally took pictures of my build of the horse and compared them. This part definitely takes the longest, maybe not in actual building time, but in time where I just stare at my build and contemplate every detail. It helps to mirror the build so that you can see it nearly and find errors easier. The neck still needs a lot done to it, and I believe I did some of that off camera. The butt is likely too round, so I make it flatter on the top, which is creating more dynamic. One of my goals is that the horse looks like it could be starting to move at any point, but until then it will take many more hours. Key to creating this energy and dynamic is to really have the leg shapes down and also the line of the head and back. Many blocks were placed by hand to smooth everything out until at some point I decided it was about time to add the tail. I do the rough shape using rolled added spheres, smooth those, and then carve in single strands of hair by hand. We'll finish it later though. For my own sanity, I changed the colors of the horse to something more fitting and subtle, and then I draw on where the saddle will go. Building up a wireframe and filling the empty spaces in with loft seems to be the fastest way to do this. As to really add as much detail as possible, I add the chestnuts on the legs now, cause otherwise I know I might forget them. I might have or might have not recorded this part because I really dreaded doing it. I draw and sculpt animals easily, but when it comes to humans I am lost. Probably the reason this video took so long, but in the end I managed to get a decent rider for the horse. Finding the right pose took a few tries though. You will find that some elements of clothing remind of cowboys, but tried my best to recreate traditional Doma Vaquera clothing. Surely I got something wrong though, but who will notice cause it looks somewhat like this? Everything has a purpose. The saddle is covered with lambskin to be comfortable for the rider, and it doesn't need a saddle cloth under it. This cloth here can be used as a cape, but when not used you can tie it to the saddle. Again, Archeon's loft tool was very useful to fill in these rather big parts of clothing. Time to add in the actual garrocha, and I will build the arms because I wasn't quite happy with them. When you're holding something in one hand, you just have one hand to hold the reins, so shifting your own body weight and positioning yourself is very important to tell the horse what to do. In the end, the rider is maybe a bit small, either that or the horse is big. Originally I planned for the horse to be wide, so that I can choose from many different blocks. But then I thought, that is too simple. So I will spend the next hours using various whites, greys and browns to make a dappled grey coat. Basically the horse is grey with lighter spots, giving me even more blocks I can use. In the first step I simply color parts of the horse differently to figure out which areas I want to be lighter and darker. Not everything should have the same grey to add realism, shading and variety. With adding darker lines I can also add a sense of depth and shape, which is pretty neat. Well, after this one leg I figured out this might take longer than anticipated because basically I have to replace every block by hand, taking steps back now and then to see how it looks from afar. These big blobs of greys are fine for the beginning, though now I go over them once more and make them smaller and transition into each other. Also I made it a bit lighter so that the white doesn't stand out too much. The brighter spots that I'm starting here on the butt are quite small, so I first outline them, use the white and then let it fade to grey. You could say this horse is a huge gradient consisting out of mini gradients. Once I have figured out how to do these spots, they don't take too long. One thing I had to consider all the time was a bit of color theory. You see, snow blocks are the brightest block, but next to calcite they don't look too bright. However, next to tuff they stand out too much, even more so next to deep slate. So in the dark grey areas I ended up using just a few blocks of diorite and more stone and tuff for the spots. Still they stand out just as much as those in the light grey areas. To add at least one colorful thing I made the cloth on the saddle red with blue and white stripes, eventually using lighter blocks to create highlights. I'd like to point out my new favorite block, light blue terracotta. You see, this all is very grey, so I added in some of this blue etching to the shadows. It adds so much depth and I love it, though I did most of it off camera. The tail and mane will actually stay white, but I still use different blocks on the tail and pretty much just make lines out of them. Like this they look like individual strands of hair. For more detail I also add candles, glass and sandstone walls. Even though from close up this looks quite busy, from afar it looks just right. The face of the human is a very sad story of me spending a very long time trying to save it, just to fail. I figured that because it is so small I should just make eyes and the mouth. From farther away it looks okay. For the human's closest I called her Mia by the way and the horse Meee, so I stuck to blocks with less texture like wool and concrete. For the horse, these highly textured blocks work great because they look like fur, but I want this to look rather smooth and the leather on the leg pieces even shiny. So I changed my way of texturing. Before I used a lot of dithering, but for this I try to use lines of colors doing a more soft looking gradient. The horse gets as fine a detail this thing on its head called mascara, being both decoration and protection against flies. Last but not least, the garrocha gets a metal tip and I simply make the top lighter and the bottom darker. Now that the horse is finally finished, time to add some surroundings. Though in the end I kept it rather simple. My first tries were based on a huge podium where I originally wanted to do sand, but I couldn't find a command that would generate fitting terrain and no way I would do this by hand because it's just huge. My second try was more abstract but looked unfitting as well. I came to the conclusion that yes, to make a fitting terrain for this highly textured build I would have to do it by hand. But instead of covering all of the ground, I just did some part under the horse and where the garrocha touches the ground. Texture it and place it on black. To connect it all, I used moss strip birch and also blue terracotta. As a final detail, I wanted to add a cloud of dust behind the horse, and for this, Axiom was very useful, making me able to place spheres out of candles, glass panes and fences. So let's have a look. I am incredibly proud of this build, just how the texturing works and the shaping of the horse's legs. It really looks very proud and majestic, like it could come to life right now and start moving. Surprisingly, even the human looks decent. I feel like this simple terraforming was in the end my best option unless I would have been willing to put in another 30 hours, which I definitely wasn't. Looking back at what I was able to do just 1 year ago, I feel like I made a lot of progress. Well, I can just hope you like this build as much as I do, and until the next time, goodbye!